Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Texas Legislative Update. I'm David Blackman here with Jason Modglin, the president of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. How you doing today, Jason?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Just great, just great. Well, we are getting to what my uncle used to call nut cutting time here on this session. My uncle was a rancher. So this is the week ended May 19th, 2023. We got 10 days left. We're recording this on the 19th, 10 days left in the session, a lot left to do, but feels like they made pretty good progress this past week.
There was a lot of progress made this last week. The Budget Conference Committee delivered most of the conference report to the legislature, or at least published on the Legislative Budget Board's website. There was a lot more movement. I think last week we talked about a few hostages in the process, and that seems to have let up a little bit this week with hearings on both sides of the building.
I like the hostages language. That's great.
to hear those bills and even if they didn't agree with them, to suggest a substitute and get things moving. So yeah, a lot of plates up in the air, if you will, or plans to land, but they've got their work cut out for them. Certainly, was pretty hefty schedule over the weekend and then into this last week.
Well, let's start with property taxes. The House had a big vote this week, and actually right before we started recording here on Friday. Talk about what happened there.
Right before we started, 147-0, the House endorsed Chairman Meyer's bill, Senate Bill 3, coming over from the Senate. It has changed quite a bit in its journey. You'll recall on the Senate side, it was an increase in the homestead exemption, a compression of the school tax rate, and then a little bit of an adder for folks over 65. Good bill.
I get that one. That's awesome.
Pretty solid. The House's version was quite a bit different. It was more focused on appraisal caps, not just of homesteads, but of all property. Taking all property appraisals down to a 5% appraised cap, so that your taxable value could only grow by 5% each year. It also had a school tax compression rate that was phenomenal, lowering that school tax rate. And then there was lots of back and forth. I think we talked about the Twitter wars several weeks ago, and between the presiding officers on those votes. You had former President Trump get engaged and send text messages out to Republican voters in the state saying endorse the Senate plan. The House committee looked at it and said, well, why don't we do both? And so what they've done is they've increased the homestead exemption even higher than what the Senate had. They include a 5% appraisal cap. And they compress the school tax rate even more.
Do they have enough money to do all that?
Well, unfortunately, this is not the federal government, so we can't just print the money. So I'm not sure how that bill squares with the budget, but it did just pass the House 147-0, and so we'll see kind of as they go back to the Senate and they get into conference, what's the actual numbers that Senator Huffman, Chairman Bonin allow for this budget cycle, projecting out a little bit into the future, where we probably won't have a $32 billion budget surplus next session to account for. And so what's a prudent approach so that legislators, governors serving next session aren't faced with raising property taxes? That would not be good for anybody. And so I think ultimately they'll think about what's something that we can deliver long-term for homeowners, for businesses in the state, and not be faced with a tax increase next session, basically baked in. And so I think it'll come down. I think it'll probably be closer to the Senate plan at the end of the day. but it's made for some interesting politics and reporting for sure.
Yeah.
147 to 0 is pretty substantial. That used to, I think, mean a lot in negotiations between the House and the Senate, but at the end of the day, I think the numbers, the budget numbers trump everything, and so that's ultimately will get a little closer to the Senate plan.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a minute ago. The last unanimous vote in the House I can remember on a big ticket item like this. I mean, there's lots of, unanimous consents, but on a big high profile vote like this was back in 2011. Governor Perry submitted an alternative budget plan. I think it was that lost on a unanimous vote. So, I haven't seen a governor try that tactic since then. I guess it was a lesson learned. But anyway, that's all tied in with the budget negotiations. Of course, how much you cut property taxes are a big piece of this. And we still have negotiations ongoing on other budget items. I assume some progress must have been made this week. I haven't really seen a lot of news reporting about it.
There really hasn't been a lot of reporting on it. I think that's probably to come, certainly as the budget is adopted in both chambers. It was Monday night of this week that the Legislative Budget Board started posting conference documents onto their website, and so kind of a quick read Monday night and into Tuesday to make sure that all of the things that were in there and supposed to be in there remained in there, and really some critical items. I mean, just kind of running through a number of the agencies that we frequently talk about: the Railroad Commission, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. One of the big priorities going into this session was to make sure that they were able to retain their employees and have kind of a cost of living adjustment, particularly for the general counsel and some of those regulatory bodies that are losing their people, both to industry but also to other agencies. TxDOT and General Land Office, that they pay a little better, and so they're able to kind of grab some of these employees at our regulatory agencies, and that makes it difficult for the regulated community to have ongoing conversations and some stability as we're looking at rules or planning certain items. So that was great that they were able to include that for those agencies. One of big items that we've worked on together is TexNet, the seismology network at the UT Bureau of Economic Geology. Really a model for the nation that the legislature has been invested in now for 8 years, and really a phenomenal program to pinpoint seismic events in the state, really determine what may be the cause or what added to that event, and then help regulators really adopt models and solutions for continuing to allow for injection while at the same time mitigating some of those risks. So that's good that was in the budget, and then a couple side projects. You and I talked about the Ike Dike and how that's going to be a critical part of resiliency as we continue to invest in our Gulf Coast. We always run the risk of a hurricane coming into the Gulf and disrupting some of those plans, and the Army Corps of Engineers, lots of folks in the Galveston area and the Port of Houston have really put a lot of work into trying to figure out how can we replicate some of the advantages that Europe, the Middle East have in dealing with coastal issues, coastal erosion or storms. And so the state made a pretty sizable commitment, about $1 billion to the Ike Dike. A number of the other funding will come from the federal government, so that's pretty phenomenal. They also put an additional $1 billion into state parks, which is pretty big chunk of change.
What a wonderful thing! I think that's fantastic.
So that'll be phenomenal to continue growing kind of the state's park network. They have, I think it's 99 parks across the state. We do good on acreage. I think we're the leader in acreage, but thanks to Big Bend, but per capita, it's a pretty small amount. We get dwarfed by some of the other states. So
well, what we don't do good on in a lot of those state parks, like the Fannin Battleground is a great example, is maintenance.
yep.
Some of those state parks are just really in downtrodden state, and I'm really glad, really glad to see the legislature allocating more money to that.
Yeah. They're pretty dependent upon the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and lots of those civic organizations to help with maintenance. So this will be a great tool for that. So I suspect we'll have some reporting on that. There was a thought that maybe it would be up today in both chambers for a vote of approval. I don't know if that's the case. We'll be checking in here in a little bit to see, but you'll certainly see some reporting probably early next week at the latest.
Well, the last couple of weeks you've talked about House Bill 5, the replacement bill for Chapter 313, which expired recently, and looks like we've had some good progress on that, and it's got a decent chance of actually going into law. Talk about where we are on that bill.
Yeah, so when it came over to the Senate, it was unclear if that was going to be taken up by the Senate. This was a property tax abatement program that allows for large capital projects to seek an abatement, a 10-year abatement on the capital improvement from the school maintenance and operations tax. So certainly any debt that the school district took on, it would be subject at the full appraised value. But it allows for that new capital investment to essentially have a lower tax bill for a certified period of time. And that can go towards economic development, that can go towards more capital improvement. That program expired at the end of 2022. And so here we now have a new program proposed, this time by Senator Swartner, and it's called the Texas Jobs, Energy, Technology, and Innovation Act. A little bit of a mouthful, but essentially it would allow for a new program largely focused on energy and water infrastructure development. So a little bit narrower than what the House passed, but still the same concept that this would be an application process for economic development. It would go to a series of gates, if you will, first to the comptroller's office to be certified, then to the governor's office for approval and submittal to a 7-member legislative panel. Senator Swartner described as it would rotate between the House and the Senate, who had the majority each year, but that they would ultimately decide and approve on these abatements, really taking a lot of the negotiation and decision making out of the hands of school superintendents and school boards, and really elevating that to the state level. Pretty lengthy hearing. They started very early on yesterday. Senate Business and Commerce had only one bill yesterday. It was House Bill 5. They then broke, and the Senate actually went until about 6:30 last night, and then they resumed the committee hearing and went for several hours after that. So quite a bit of testimony on this. I think largely focused on 313 and just the warts, if you will, from that program, of which has had a lot of reform over the years to really make it more transparent, ensure that there's not conflicts and things of that nature. And it got to a pretty good program there at the end. but then it expired. So this is trying to take a lot of the reforms and efforts that were done for that program, move it out of the school district focus and into kind of a statewide program, and then really target who it benefits. So it's interesting how much of a focus it is on energy. That may play into some of the House negotiations on their electricity bills over the weekend. So an interesting kind of back and forth between both chambers right now.
Yeah, and in the House, we of course we have Senate Bill 2627 and SJR 93, Senate Bill 7, all of which I guess came out of State Affairs this week, right? And now they're scheduled to have a floor vote on Saturday, correct?
They are, yes. So voted out of State Affairs, and then will be taken up on Saturday. They were voted out unanimously from State Affairs. I think that was largely a deference to the chair. Most of the members received them maybe a few hours before, so didn't really have a lot of time to take in the bill and hear from folks. I think the key parts, starting with 2627, this was a loan program. As it passed the Senate, it was going to be a 0% loan program. I think a lot of House members had some difficulty in wrapping their head around that, so they raised it to a 2% loan program, so that while it's still very competitive, it's not a steal, if you will, with private lenders. SJR 93 really hasn't changed that much. This would be a vote, so we'd see this on the November ballot to allow for this type of loan program. And then Senate Bill 7, which has changed quite a bit in its journey. As it started the Senate, this was more of an insurance program. Now it's kind of morphed into just the performance credit mechanism guardrails. And the key part of that is that the House was very insistent on finding some way to put a cap on how much this would cost electricity consumers. There's been a wide range of estimates as to how much the performance credit mechanism will cost consumers on an annual basis. No one's had a really firm grasp of how much it would cost. E3, who's kind of the lead consultant for the Public Utility Commission, has had several estimates as well, largely based on some assumptions that there will be some retirements in place, and so that may elevate some of the costs of the program. But you talk to electric generators, and they certainly point to the PCM being both critical for maintaining older facilities, keeping them in the fleet, and then also attracting some new capital investment, particularly to dispatchable energy. But again, without a firm cost in place and really knowledge from the Public Utility Commission as to how much they would authorize on an annual basis, the House came to the conclusion that there needed to be a dollar cap in place. Yeah. I think the initial proposal was $500 million. That's a pretty low amount in the grand scheme of things. And so that was raised to $1 billion. So on an annual basis, the most they could add to the existing electric market is $1 billion. There's a lot of back and forth right now as to what that actually needs to be. Is it 1.5? Is it 2? Is it 3? You've got a wide range of estimates as to what the actual PCM will cost, whether it's $4.5 billion or $9 billion.
But that's over a period of how many years, though, right? 10 years? Is that what that is? Or
no, potentially on an annual basis.
On an annual basis? Wow.
Now, given that's entirely based on if it's needed, if there are retirements, if there are a lack of wind and solar performance, and there's the need to pay for this performance during those scarcity times. So it's not clear, and I think the House was saying, given that risk, let's try to figure out just a flat cap on how much that would cost consumers. So we'll see. Ultimately, this will be up in the in the House, excuse me, for a vote on Saturday, and then they'll get into the conference committee and try to determine where it should be. You've had some of the generators say if a cost cap is passed, they'll cancel some of these announcements on investing in the state. That's certainly a big threat right now for sure. When some of the top priority is putting steel in the ground. At the same time, you know what's an acceptable number, and you know there's a little bit of ribbing quite a bit back and forth as to we're negotiating on a number on a page without really having a firm grasp of what it's going to take to build these facilities. So so we'll see what they come up with on Saturday.
Yeah, we'll see. Should be interesting. I won't comment further than that, just to protect everybody here. The only other thing I've got here is Senate Bill 624, the retirement of solar and wind installations. Still sitting there in state affairs, has had no action since it was referred there on May 8th.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do we think it's going to move?
Still sitting there. You know, like I said, they're going to have a very busy Saturday with these electric bills, and then we'll see next week if they can meet quickly and start moving things. Tuesday is the deadline to have bills out of committee. So you're really getting into a crunch here with moving those bills. It's certainly possible they can move pretty quick. And so if they start to move stuff on Saturday or Monday, there might still be an opportunity to get it out basically.
Well, last thing, it doesn't have anything to do with energy, but it's an annual or biannual effort to pass casino gambling in the Texas legislature. I call it the casino lobbyist full employment activity every session. Been going on for a quarter of a century now. That bill died again, along with sportsbook betting this year, this past week, and I guess it sounds like Chairman Guerin said it won't be considered again until the 2027 session. How does one member of the House postpone something like that for 2 sessions?
Well, they have a lot of fun with postponements. As you recall, my former boss postponed something till the anniversary of Spindletop, and Chairman Guerin pointed to 2027. I think maybe that was a nod to a change in state leadership, but I'll let you ask Chairman Guerin that question. But ultimately, the House did pass a sports betting bill. That was about the only thing that got out of the House in terms of expanded gambling. Shortly after it was passed, Lieutenant Governor Patrick said, this has zero support in the Senate. I'm not even going to refer it to committee. And so that essentially doomed that effort. Lots of people supportive of that, sports teams across the state. Former Governor Perry was working on that item. The other one was kind of this destination casino gambling, sell a number of licenses to specific parts of the state, probably Kemah, Galveston, maybe the DFW area, San Antonio, that type of thing. Really for these destination style resorts, so not 8-liners and gas stations and things like that, but ultimately there there was a lack of support. They had to get over 100 votes to move these bills because they're prohibited by the Constitution. The sports betting bill was, I think, at 98 votes when it first was taken up by the House, and ultimately was able to get 101 votes and move forward. But the destination gambling bill was significantly lower. It was closer to 90 votes, and they were never able to make up the last 10. And so Chairman Guerin, or Speaker Guerin, excuse me, suggested that they take it up in 4 years.
Well, the states of Louisiana and Oklahoma and Nevada can breathe a sigh of relief. There will be no gambling in Texas, so at least not legal. Anyway, I guess I should clarify that I'm all in favor of casino gambling in Texas, as long as it's the destination, very limited.
Yep. Or El Paso, we've got a tribe there that has a casino, and so just go to El Paso, skip Oklahoma and Louisiana and travel out there.
It's only 700 miles from Dallas. Come on.
It's a quick Southwest flight. It's pretty easy.
Nothing to it. Okay. Well, that's enough of that. Enough casino talk. Well, anything else for the good of the art before we move on to next week?
No, we're kind of it's coming down to the wire. So 10 more days, and hopefully they'll land a lot of these planes.
Hopefully so. You don't want to be there in August in a special session. All
No,
right. Well,
not June, July, or August.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
None of that.
It's hot in Austin. Anyway, hey man, have a great weekend, and thanks to all our viewers. Really appreciate it. We've been getting great response to this, and really appreciate it. And the audience has grown bigger every week, which is very nice. And hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back with you next Friday. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.